understand that you have actually got new information coming out, such as Ed Dames and all that. I'd like to get into that as we go on. But I guess what we could do first, for anybody who might not be too familiar with this, which I don't see how anyone is out of the loop, but it's possible, maybe we could start out and give them a rundown on what happened to you and what Project Pegasus is all about.
Well, Project Pegasus was the U.S. time-space program at the time of its emergence. There's a true hidden history of U.S. time travel research and development. It began as an intelligence gathering effort in the mid-1960s. An intelligence funnel, if you will, was created under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which had reporting requirements to the CIA. And they basically put everything that they could find that would give the U.S. government a time-space capability. I'm talking about information from ancient civilizations, from extraterrestrial civilizations, from the Nazi and Soviet work in time travel, and obviously, of course, the information from 20th century geniuses like Nikola Tesla and Enrico Fermi, and the Vatican priests, Father Ernetti and Gemelli. And they placed all of this information in a common program under DARPA. It was a multi-agency program. The bases were basically protected by the U.S. Army. The educational components that were used for the adult and child participants were designed by the Office of Naval Research. And I was brought into Project Pegasus, which is what the project was described to the children involved. It wasn't necessarily called Project Pegasus among the adults. The adults were simply speaking of it as the program. It was basically the time travel program for which the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk stories were scripted kind of on a limited public hangout basis. There's a lot of truth in the Philadelphia story and in the Montauk accounts, but there was a lot of manipulation of information as well to mask the actual program, which was under DARPA. I was brought in informally sometime between 1967 and 68 because that's when I first teleported through a Tesla device, which was located in Building 68 at the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey, with my late father, Raymond F. Basiago, who was, he had a history at Curtiss-Wright going back to October of 1952 when he was ordered to report there to work on the ramjet for Curtiss-Wright, which was going to be a high-performance jet aircraft that would enable us to basically chase flying saucers out of our atmosphere in the near-Earth environment. So my father had been working on and off at Curtiss-Wright. He worked, for example, also on the B-70, which was going to be the nuclear power-equipped strategic bomber for the U.S. Air Force. Mm-hmm. So that was about 15 minutes from our home in M.A.R.S. Plains. One Saturday morning, he brought me over there and showed me an object. It was basically two parenthesis-shaped booms, between which was broadcast a form of energy that Nikola Tesla had discovered the way to derive from the universe, an energy that was the form of energy that Tesla himself and in his lab manuals called radiant energy. And radiant energy has the capacity to bend the fabric of time-space. So my father explained how we were going to jump through that field of energy that was being broadcast between the two booms of the device and go through a kind of an illuminated tunnel and then end up, well, I can't really say that it was illuminated, but it was certainly, you could certainly see where you were going. And that we were going to pop out through, at the end of the tunnel, somewhere else in the country. Well, when we did that, I ultimately found that we were in the location that for the next 5 years would serve as the destination for the teleportation that was going on across the country. We found ourselves in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that was used as the collection area really during all of my activities on Project Pegasus. That was certainly a place we were teleporting to frequently. From there, we drove in a New Mexico state vehicle up to the Los Alamos National Laboratory and met with Dr. Harold M. Agnew when he was the director of the Weapons Division. And during that conversation, my father had, asked Harold whether he had tried it yet. and he said, no, but I want to, indicating that teleportation was a fairly new application in the Department of Defense. I remember also that Harold looked over at me and said, how old? And my father and I answered simultaneously, 6. So that means that that first teleportation with my father to meet Dr. Agnew, who would go on to be the director of the Los Alamos National Labs in 1970, had to have taken place between September of 1967 and September of 1968, because I had been born in September of 1961. So that, with that leap, that quantum leap, I kind of leapt into the U.S. time-space program at the time of its infancy, because what had been occurring since World War II, of course, the War Department had seized Tesla's papers after his death in January of 1943, and really for the next 25 years was on and off tinkering with his schematics and other findings that were being made about time space and how to manipulate it, how to travel not in it but through it. And so I sort of leapt into the program at that point. I think my dad was trying to show Dr. Agnew that if teleportation was safe for his youngest child, I was the 5th born and my dad's number 3 son, and he sort of looked over at me and said, Harold asked him, how was the leap? How was the trip? And my dad said, fine and fast. And Harold said, oh, did you take the teleporter? And my dad looked over at me and said, yeah, and so did my number 3 son, Andrew. So I think my dad, being a believer in the notion that teleportation should see the light of day and be used to advantage human civilization, was showing this very important decision maker there in the atomic research community that I had arrived with him, so it was even safe for children. And we certainly arrived there intact. And then officially beginning in the fall of 1969, I was placed in the time-space program. At the time, they began actually training children and working with us in different forms of time travel for different reasons. So I signed my security oath in, I think it was on October 5th of 1969, right around there, if I can remember the date from the form, under Department of Defense letterhead, by the way. It was DOD letterhead. And was agreeing there as an 8-year-old to keep our project activities secret. But my position now is that, Michael, is that children lack the capacity to contract. And so I'm speaking out now because I believe that what Project Pegasus achieved 40 years ago is going to be needed. We're going to need to basically declassify and deploy it, not just to advantage humanity, but I think possibly even to achieve sustainability in the 21st century. And so I'm speaking out as a moral imperative to share with others the fact that the U.S. government achieved different forms of time travel by 1970, and indeed was training the next cadre of chrononauts by working with us as children. And I basically started investigating my experiences back in around 2000, spent a good 5 years doggedly hunting down the facts, and then began speaking out around 2004, 2005. And now I'm waging a global truth campaign to share this information with the human race so that we can rescue this information from the secret realm that it's trapped in, and really, so that the United States can lead the world in revolutionizing transportation around the world, which is really what I think we should be focusing on rather than waging wars of foreign adventurism. And so
I agree with you, Andrew. Well, I was just going to say, I agree with you 100%. This type of technology could change humanity forever, and that is for the better. And, what I worry about is why they're keeping it a secret, why they won't come out with it. Is it because the elites got their hands on it, and maybe they have their own agenda with it?
Well, I just had an assistant to President Nixon in 1969-70, somebody that has asked that I not identify him. But it was basically an investigator, sort of an attaché to the president, who told me that the reason that teleportation was never introduced publicly was not the classically formulated reasons of they were afraid that it would tilt the economy away from the petroleum industry, or that if introduced rapidly it would destabilize society, nor for the fact that it was weaponized and kept secret as a military technology. but he claimed it was too expensive to power the teleporter. Well, if that was the case, how is it that the teleport device at Curtis Wright in Woodridge was plugged into the wall with an industrial strength outlet, but one that was no larger than you would use, let's say, to power, I don't know, an industrial drill press? I mean, there was no major, another individual a number of years ago was trying to tell me that the tokamak fusion project at Princeton was powering the teleporters, but I don't believe that. The teleporter at Curtis Wright was using more power than you would use to power a microwave, but certainly not power that would be on the small shop level of some, shop level industrial appliance like a drill press or a lathe. It was simply a black cord.
You know what's funny, Andy, is that they'll come out and say, well, to run a teleporter takes too much, costs too much to run it, but it doesn't cost too much for us to run all these wars that we are currently funding.
Right. Precisely. I mean, why are we waging oil wars where we devastate the civilian populations, in this case of the Middle East, blow the arms and legs off of Iraqi and Afghani and Libyan children, when we're not even, the President is not even instructing, for example, the General Accounting Office or the Office of Management and Budget or the Defense Department itself even to go in and find out what we ourselves have developed as a great civilization that could do things, could do more with less input of energy, time, and material, so that we wouldn't be dependent on fossil fuels to transport people around the world. I think it's really a moral outrage that we would become a nation that would betray the first of the Nuremberg principles, which is the duty not to wage aggressive war, when we ourselves have the secrets to supplant the fossil fuel-based economy with more efficient technology. How can I not speak out when that is the case? When my own government, which was admonished by General George Washington in his farewell address to abstain from entangling alliances, and which framed the Nuremberg principles in the modern era with the prosecution of the Nazi hierarchy by one of our most distinguished jurists, Justice Robert Jackson, and framing that international injunction against waging aggressive warfare and doing it in the context of a conspiracy and committing war crimes in the process and also crimes against humanity. We have become involved in violating the Nuremberg principles to prop up an oil and other fossil fuel-based economy that has been obsolete since 1970. That's a moral outrage. And both our Republican and Democratic presidents have done it. And Michael, if I have to run for president myself, I will do it to try to bring about this revolution of peaceful change that's possible with the know-how that our fathers and grandfathers developed.
And you know what? I think you'd get a lot of support on that. I did hear something about you possibly running for president, Andrew. I want to take a break here real fast.
Yes, I've decided to seek the presidency in 2016. It seems like the right timing, and I'm currently putting an organization together because I just don't see any leadership. I mean, I think we're literally stuck in the 70s. As we sit in these 1970s vehicles in a country where the average person now is commuting 2 hours out of their 24 hours a day that they have to live, it's clear that we're literally trapped in an anachronistic technical environment. I mean, even if we could introduce teleportation to remove the 16-wheelers from the highways, we would free up our roadways for civilian, commuter transport, and take all the danger caused by the larger trucks on the highways out of the equation. That itself would save billions and billions of dollars of shipping costs. I mean, if, for example, we found that it wouldn't be medically advised, or it would be impracticable to have human beings teleporting, we still should be thinking in terms of shipping goods via teleportation. Imagine how successful we would be in famine relief if instead of having to fly food supplies to starving people, we could simply open up a vortal tunnel in time-space and create basically netting on the receiving end and start shoving food supplies through the very teleportation devices that our military developed 40 years ago. I think that the United States should be leading the world in applied scientific development and in humanitarian development. And we have the wealth and the know-how to do so, but we don't have any leadership. And why I wouldn't be naturally predisposed to seek the presidency, I'm at the point where I've decided to do so because I simply do not see any leadership. You know, Al Gore, not to pick on Al Gore because he's really one of our most distinguished public servants. I mean, he served for 8 years in the House, the Senate, and the Vice Presidency. Then he led, before winning the Nobel Peace Prize, he led a fairly courageous campaign to bring global public awareness to the climate change issue. But that's reactive. That's not responsive. I mean,
some would say that he got rich off the whole global warming thing, and I agree that the planet's definitely going through changes, but when they blame it on people, I would ask them, why are the other planets going through the same changes? So some aren't on board with.
Well, let's assume, arguendo, there is a climate change problem that's caused by natural forces, human forces, or some combination thereof. We shouldn't be focusing on the fact that the phenomenon is occurring. I mean, when it's raining, you think about using your umbrella. You don't think about the fact that it's raining. You don't bemoan the rain. You know, you open your umbrella. So where's the umbrella? I mean, cap and trade is essentially a short-term palliative. We know that every time population doubles, you have to double the efficacy of your pollution control just to stay where you are. So the cap and trade model that the climate change community developed is essentially a short-term command and control model that, again, keeps us stuck in the 70s. It keeps us stuck in the limits to growth model, that we have to manipulate that formula involving population and consumption and not focus on the third part of that equation, which is technical innovation. And we had this teleportation technology at the time that Al Gore was sitting in Roger Revelle's climate change class at Harvard in 1970, just becoming aware of the issue of, as it was called then, the greenhouse effect. So I feel a moral imperative to speak out, and I will be running for president in 2016 as my Truth campaign gathers steam, because I just simply see nobody in public life focusing on the notion that we need to recapture what we ourselves have already invented and liberate it from the secret military context in which it's sequestered and utilize it to lead the world.
I'm a little concerned about this new bill, this detention bill that has just passed. And, I hope that we still have a country to call our own come in 2016, because now the military is able to arrest American citizens right on American soil with no reasons, just grab you because they think you're a security threat.
Right, and that's another
scary.
kind of development. That's in the nature of these negative developments that we've been seeing that has motivated me to begin talking about running for president, because this is literally an attack on the U.S. Constitution. This shouldn't be tolerated. The American people haven't volunteered their sons and daughters in these foreign wars that we've been waging illegally to then be subjected to the control mechanisms of a tyrannical government at home. We can't allow the United States of America to become a police state, and yet the passage of that bill indicates that that's what our government is preparing for. So I think what we're going to see, quite frankly, I think we're probably going to see a Gingrich presidency for 4 years, and there's not going to be any fundamental change except further ruination of the economy and further steps towards a police state for 4 years. So I think there's going to be probably something on the line of almost public outrage that will almost reach revolutionary fervor by around 2015. And so I think it's going to be a very chaotic campaign, but I think we're going to see a group of high-spirited, non-professional politicians enter the fray in 2015 leading into 2016. I think either President Obama is going to be elected or we're going to see a Gingrich presidency. I should add that when I discussed future presidents with my father in the late 1980s based on his his reading of CIA intelligence reports containing future information, namely information that was gathered by different forms of time travel technology and codified in CIA intelligence reports that people who were insiders, both within the CIA and Project Pegasus, were reading, those like my father who had a need to know what we were finding out about the future. I asked him to predict for me who would be the next presidents, and he stated that young governor who just gave that terrible speech at the Democratic Convention. This was in 1988-89 timeframe. And I said, Bill Clinton? He said, yes, Bill Clinton. And then I said, who else? And he said, George W. Bush. And I said, you mean the vice president? I might have even said the president-elect, because this was 88-89. And he said, no, his son. And then I said, who else, Dad? Who are you? And he said, well, there's an African-American president's going to be elected, but I can't really recall his name. It's a very unusual name. It was something like Barack Obama, because this is the late 80s. He's thinking back to things he read in the early and mid-70s, when Project Pegasus began sending people to the future and also propagating hologrammatic images of future events and past events, utilizing a revolutionary remote viewing device called the chronovisor. The chronovisor is basically an electro-optical device that propagates a hologram of a past or future event. So by the mid-70s, they already had an awareness of things like who the next presidents would be. And I said, were you told of anybody else becoming president? And he said, yeah, Nudie. My dad was a Republican from Pennsylvania, although I remember he said he had voted for Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy for president. But so he also revealed that Newt Gingrich was a future president. I think because of the unpopularity of Barack Obama that we'll see, and because of his basic apparent leadership ability in the sense that he's a person of strong convictions and yet of some solidity as a personality, I think we're going to turn to Newt Gingrich simply to get action on some of our problems. But I think that what we're going to see are solutions that are going to be unpalatable to the majority of the population. So I think we'll be in a revolutionary situation by 2015.
Yeah, I think that we're definitely headed there. I mean, you see so many people, so many uprisings happening around the world, so many people finally becoming awake as to what's going on, and really our mainstream media and our country has been getting hijacked right from under us. And people have sat around and allowed this, and I think that they've done it long enough. I think it's time that we speak out. Otherwise, we're going to have military arresting us for doing stuff like we're doing right now, speaking on this show. We definitely can't have that.
Well, we saw the brave speech given by Senator Kirk on the floor of the Senate about the fact that this can't be allowed. I mean, this is basically the suspension of our civil liberties at home and military intervention against American citizens on U.S. soil, which has always been illegal under the Posse Comitatus Act. And that's what we're moving towards, is a militarized society where not only have local law enforcement agencies been militarized, but now we're going to permit the military to interdict and arrest U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. That's a fearsome development. That itself, I think, is one of the fire bells in the night that will ignite a populist uprising as we proceed through this election and then into the next administration.
Okay. Now, I heard on a previous interview that you did on Coast, and actually he got kind of upset about it. Now, I've never had him as a guest here on this show, but I did hear it. Major Ed Dames. So he was actually a part of Project Pegasus. So,
well,
there's more people coming out.
Let me clarify. Project Pegasus was the U.S. time-space program under DARPA that was developing different time travel technologies and using them to perform information gathering about past and future events so that the executive branch of the United States government, namely the presidency and his cabinet officials, the intelligence community, and the military, could engage in better contingency planning in the present for future events. And a greater awareness of the past and future conditions and events would allow that. Project Pegasus persisted through 1973, around 1974-75. somebody who had reporting requirements to the project had a heart attack on the way into work, and the project fell apart for a year or two, and then it was recomposed in the mid to late 1970s. Now, as I've described in my other interviews, there were 8 different time travel technologies that I was exposed to. I should say technologies and methodologies, basically from conventional remote viewing all the way to using advanced stargates to physically travel to the future. And because I was one of the children who went very far in the program, between 1969 and 72, I had experiences involving all of those 8 time travel technologies. Then we were all summarily dismissed from the project at the end of the summer of 1972. Actually, most of us were dismissed at the beginning of the summer of 72, but some of us were then recalled for a final summer in New Mexico. Now, at that time, the last time travel technology they were working on was essentially something that was about the size of a microwave oven, and one of the project principals would open up the device, and there would be, let's say, documents from Washington there. So it was basically a solid-state teleportation unit in a box. Sometime between 1972 and the late 1970s, we're talking 1976, 77, because this is when we have Michael Relf's account of taking the jump room to Mars. That final time travel technology that I was exposed to in the early 70s was modeled into a platform to basically manipulate the fabric of time-space between the Earth and Mars, so that by 1976-77, we had already begun to teleport American citizens to the surface of Mars. Mars is certainly a fragile desert environment. It has much less water, vegetation, and substantially less oxygen in its atmosphere, but it has a breathable atmosphere. In fact, Mars has a blue sky because oxygen is a clear gas which refracts blue across the expanse of the Earth and Mars. And so I had a fairly conventional junior high and high school period, and I'd spent a year at the University of California at San Diego in 1979-80. But in the summer of 1980, at our home in Chatsworth, California, my dad basically invited me into another round of secret work for the U.S. Defense Department. He described how we were going to be going camping up in the Mount Shasta area. And it was just going to be a father and son trip. None of my other family members would be going that year. We had always camped together as a family. And he said, no, it's just going to be you and your dad. So we drove up one Saturday morning, roughly in the middle of August of 1980. I'm 18 years old. I've just done a year of college. And the first strange thing that happened is that he stopped at the McLeod Market in McLeod, California, which is right there near Mount Shasta. And he said, son, don't leave the car. Just stay in the car. Whatever happens, stay in the car. I don't want you to leave the car. I'll be back in about 15 minutes. I saw him walk into the McLeod Market and come out 15 or 20 minutes later with a 5-day growth of beard, suggesting that he had been somewhere for 5 days. Simultaneously, somebody who approached me after my second appearance on Coast, which was on November of 2010, an individual then growing up in La Cañada, California, named William Brett Stillings, who was considerably younger than I. Brett was actually 13 in the summer of 1980. His dad said the exact same thing to him. Son, we're going to be going camping up in Mount Shasta. Brett's father drove him up to the McLeod Market, shaved in the car, and then went into the McLeod Market and came out with a 3-day growth of beard. Okay, we don't know what they accessed in that market, but they must have had access at that point to some kind of underground infrastructure that then took them to a teleporter. And they went on some time loop so that they had a very visible growth of beard when they came back to the car, the separate cars respectively. So Brett and I speculate, after Brett approached me in about March of 2011. Excuse me. Brett approached me after I was first on Coast on November 11th of 2009. So he contacted me in about March 1st, February, March of 2010. And we've been piecing together the pieces ever since of what happened that summer. The first strange thing that happened to us, besides this issue of our dads disappearing in a grocery store and coming out with a 5-day growth of beard, was that we met up at the, and we were introduced to each other as friends at the campground at Lake Siskiyou. Again, a Mount Shasta location there. And Tom Stillings, Brett's father, who had a background with the Office of Naval Intelligence and was then working as an operations analyst for Lockheed, the Lockheed Skunk Works facility in Burbank, California, showed us a small slab of metal that levitated and explained how it was a boundary layer material that had a complete proton shell so that it basically had a reverse magnetic effect hovering above the ground. That was kind of odd. Brett and I also have now established that the second day of that weekend, that first weekend at the campground, our fathers got up promptly Sunday at 1 o'clock and walked over with us to a neighboring campground where we encountered astronaut Buzz Aldrin. In fact, we haven't even discussed this publicly yet. And as we walked into his campsite between the two vehicles that were parked in front of it, astronaut Aldrin said something like, "Boys, it looks like you're going to be doing something I did a number of years ago, which is go off planet and walk on another celestial body." And Brett and I looked at each other and really didn't understand what Buzz was saying to us. But then Brett can establish publicly that for the next number of years, he remained in very close friendship with astronaut Aldrin. In other words, a kind of a mentor role for astronaut Aldrin developed in Brett's young life. The next strange thing is that night, that Sunday night at about 10 o'clock, my dad, were around the campfire, and my dad said to Brett and I, "Boys, you're going to be taking some classes up at the college beginning tomorrow." And I said, "Dad, what are you talking about? I just spent my first year in college. I thought we were going to have some fun on this trip." And he said, "No, I'm sorry, Andy. We've actually taken you up here because you're going to be enrolled in a 3-week course of study here." And I said, "A course of study in what?" And he said, it's going to be on Mars. And I said, "Dad, this is crazy. I'm not an astronomy major. I mean, I was studying literature at UC San Diego. I'm going to transfer into the history program at UCLA in the fall. Why would I want to know anything about Mars?" And he said, "Because some of you kids in the class are going to be going up there." And Brett and I, having already been involved, I mean, Brett wasn't involved as extensively in the teleportation activities that I was, but he had a number of bizarre experiences in Southern California where they were kind of fast-tracking him on teleportation and other secret technologies. Brett basically is a mechanical prodigy. I mean, he was repairing television sets when he was 4 or 5 years old without instruction. So the next morning, Monday morning, we drove up to the college that my father had referenced, which was the College of the Siskiyous, which is a small California community college right adjacent to Mount Shasta. In fact, Mount Shasta sort of looms over that campus. Very small campus. Certainly a campus that nobody would pay any attention to what was going on in terms of instruction or who was there, literally toward the middle end of the summer. It's mid-August, and summer school had already been dismissed. But we were taken to a particular room. We went over to one of the rooms there with our fathers and met the instructor of that class. And it is my contention, and Brett supports it, he corroborates the fact that our instructor for the Mars visitation experiences that then ensued was the remote viewing pioneer, Major Ed Dames. Now, let me note that we've said nothing derogatory about Ed Dames. Right. We've simply stated that it is our position that he was our instructor, that it was a 3-week seminar regarding Mars for young people who would soon be visiting the Red Planet, and that we have publicly thanked him for doing such a superb job in educating us that we survived our trips to Mars. Because Mars is a planet that is not only inhabited by humanoids, actually 3 primary types of humanoids, but about 30 land-based creatures, animals, some of which are predators. And among those predators, there are several that are so vicious and so adept at killing humanoid life that we were schooled in the fact that we would not be able to stay alive if confronted by the most adept predators on the surface. So we've now gone public. Alfred Lambermont Weber wrote a phenomenal article for the Examiner about our experiences in the Mars visitation program, and we went public on November 10th of this year, just last month, about the CIA's Mars visitation program. And Brett and I continue to share notes with what we remembered happened, what we were told by Major Dames in that training program, who was in it, and then also we've been continuing to compare notes about our memories of going up to Mars. And so my Truth campaign has essentially entered its second phase, which is now that I've done about 5 TV interviews, maybe 50 radio interviews about where the secret U.S. time-space capability was by 1970, I'm now describing where the CIA's secret Mars visitation capability was by 1980, and it's already causing some of the participants to weigh in somewhat vocally and react to the information. But we stick by our claim, and we laud Ed Dames for the superb job he did as our instructor.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people out there who get angry when you bring out the truth. That's for sure. Believe me, we experience it here all the time. Some just, they don't like it. As a matter of fact, they discredit it. And as a matter of fact, I had Alfred Weber on just recently, and we got on the subject of some who try to discredit this. And I think one was Major Ed Dames, but another was Richard Hoagland, who called Andrew nuts, or called you nuts rather, and called Alfred nuts. And I take offense to that because, you look at some of the things that these guys portray, and how can they go and call anybody else crazy, especially when they don't know enough about it?
Well, I mean, first there's denial, and then there's ad hominem attacks, and then the ad hominem attacks become vicious. Now, regarding Mr. Hoagland, I simply have to say that when I went public with my Mars findings, I was imagining that literally the dean of independent Mars anomaly research was going to rise to the full mantle of leadership in the Mars anomaly field, namely Richard Hoagland, and celebrate my findings. But what I've gotten from him basically is a constant barrage of disparagement that even has gone to the extent of not only him simultaneously calling me a kook and an intelligence operative, which is kind of inconsistent. I mean, are you crazy, or are you a self-interested operative? But he has even done things like put my surname in lowercase letters in quotation marks as if to indicate I'm a non-person. And what's so ironic about that, I think Richard holds a BS in science. I hold a BA in history from UCLA. I earned a BS in advanced math under an operations research program under the Naval Postgraduate School that we didn't even report when we graduated. So I earned 2 baccalaureates at UCLA as an undergrad, one of which is on my resume, the other of which is in Navy files, because they were working with civilians to prepare them to become naval intelligence officers in the event that we had another world war. And that program has been going on at UCLA since World War II. I then went on to earn a law degree and an environmental law certificate at the nation's leading environmental law school, which is Northwestern School of Law of Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, and then earned 2 advanced degrees in environmental planning, one at Cal Poly SLO with distinction and the other at Cambridge. I'm a published scholar in environmental planning. And I have clearly enough, and I dare say more, educational preparation than Mr. Hoagland to evaluate what's on Mars. And in addition to that, in the early 1980s, I traveled there. And then in the last decade, in 2008, I published the first work to show that Mars is inhabited. So what I find so preposterous is Mr. Hoagland's self-referential assertion that somehow he possesses authority. This is an individual who hasn't even been examining the rover data. And he's telling somebody far better educated than him, far more experienced in visiting Mars, and somebody who spent a year studying one NASA photograph to show the life that was in it. What's up? And I just find that ridiculous. But
I do too. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, he continues to disparage me. I think what we have to ask is, why did this individual focus on me? We have other Mars anomalists that are doing phenomenal work. We've got George J. Haas and William R. Sanders, who have established the Mayan Aztecan connection to some of the Mars ruins, the Mars artifacts that we can see from the satellite data. We've got a brilliant independent anomalist at MarsAnomalyResearch.com, namely Joseph Skipper. We've got Paul Goodwin at Mars Uncensored on Facebook. We've got Andrew R. Steck in Pennsylvania doing his work on mining sites and that type of thing, things that are evident in the photographs. And then we have all of the anomalists that are working with me at the Mars Anomaly Research Society, Ross Curley, Louis Michael Reinhardt, and so forth. And so the question is, why is it that any time I make a pronouncement, Mr. Hoagland has to assert that I'm crazy, or I'm working for the CIA, or I don't exist? I consider that disinformation per se. I think it goes beyond ego, and it goes beyond pettiness. I believe that it is a script that is being played by some of the career disinformationists in the exopolitical community. And I think those include not just Mr. Hoagland, but Dr. Michael Salla and Stephen Bassett, because they've been playing the same game. Stephen Bassett has been going around stating that I'm a CIA agent sent to infiltrate and sabotage exopolitics as a movement. Well, I mean, for Christ's sake, I helped Alfred edit his book Exopolitics, the work that founded the discipline. I'm being entirely transparent of my work for DARPA and the CIA. I'm trying to articulate what I did for the CIA on Mars. Isn't that a fit subject for the world's leading exopolitical theorists?
I think so.
Yeah, a really crazy game is being played here. Michael Salla has been repeatedly misspelling my name Basiago, which I know from in ways that I can't really actually articulate here, is actually the misspelling of my surname that appears in the CIA surveillance file of me that was begun when I was at UCLA and I was going to Mars for CIA, but simultaneously working as a journalist in Los Angeles. My byline, my surname got misspelled in a number of articles that were editorials that I wrote for the UCLA Daily Bruin. And that misspelling has been in my CIA file since the early 1980s. Well, that's the spelling that Salla's been using. How is that? Okay, so I just want the name calling and the disparagement to stop, because in fact I have important information to share with the exopolitical community, not as a theorist but as a practitioner, not as somebody who has just studied NASA's data from Mars, but somebody who went there and somebody who brought forward Brett Stillings, who is a corroborating witness. How often in the paranormal and in parascience has somebody made a dramatic claim and brought along an eyewitness participant? That's what I've done in Brett Stillings. Brett Stillings, as far as I'm concerned, is an American hero. Brett just recently provided me information that was within his recall regarding our Mars experiences that's allowed me to turn a chapter on what happened to us beginning in 1980 in the CIA's Mars visitation program. So maybe I can describe that tonight. But, really the name calling has to end, because, the notion that we've been visiting our neighboring planet for 30 years is one of the critical issues in exopolitics. And it's much bigger than me. It's much bigger than Brett and some of the other people that were going up there.
Okay, Andrew, before you go into your next segment here, I just want to comment on that and say that I totally agree. I can't speak on all the other individuals who you had brought up, but I can say firsthand with Richard Hoagland, I have found a lot of discrepancies in everything that he does. I found that he hides information. He does a lot of disinfo, and he does a big discredit to the truth movement, and that's my opinion. And we just busted out a big story. We've had people come forward about Richard, and I looked into it. And you know what? I tried to ask him about this just on a man-to-man level, and he ran from me, and he insulted me, and just felt like he didn't need to answer it. And now people are asking him questions. I think that he's still connected with NASA. I really do.
Well, he was a NASA publicist, and it was curious that when I published my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, in 2008, not from the perspective of a Mars experiencer, but from the perspective of natural history, which was my goal in that paper, which was simply to frame the findings of what we could find in the NASA photographs, not talk about my background, because that would be just too far out, I thought, at that time. Mm-hmm. It was curious that everybody who attacked me had a link to NASA. Richard Hoagland had worked as a publicist. Ray Villard, who stated on the Discovery Channel website, he stated, this is almost a verbatim quote, he said, if Basiago says that there are these little leprechauns on Mars, why doesn't he show pictures of them in his papers? Well, I was. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That was in a 3,000-word diatribe written with U.S. taxpayer dollars by Ray Villard when he was serving as the publicist for NASA's Hubble Space Telescope. He was disparaging a civilian who had published a paper with images of Martian humanoids in it, but he was trying to indirect what had happened. He was trying to steer people away from the truth by stating basically that I was a kook saying that there were these little creatures on Mars. I was showing them. I was showing, in fact, the image of the humanoid being on Tsiolkovsky Ridge in NASA image PIA 10214 had been so highly prioritized by the CIA that my father first showed it to me in 1969. It had actually been retrieved from the future and brought back in time. So the true history of this is that NASA and the CIA have known since the late 60s that Mars is inhabited. By 1970, my father and I had an experience where Martian astronauts were actually in liaison with our aeronautical community that included, aerospace engineers like my dad. So, here we are 40 years later. My paper comes out, and the first 5 completely ridiculous attacks on me that didn't even cohere to what was in my paper were by current or former NASA personnel. At this point, I think what happened, I think the script that they handed Hoagland was, he's highly educated, he's highly articulate, he has the courage to speak the truth, say that he's crazy. That's the old Robertson panel script from 1953. Subject those who are affirming the existence of extraterrestrial life to public campaigns involving fear and ridicule. That was the diktat of the Robertson panel, the Durant report of the CIA's Robertson panel of 1952-53. The other disparagement was, well, damn, what do you know? He's showing up under DARPA, CIA, Navy, LANL, and Sandia, and NASA because of the M.A.R.S probes that we took. So what do we do with this guy? Oh, damn, he's a trial lawyer in good standing in Washington State. Oh, geez, he's got degrees from UCLA and Cambridge. Let's say that he's working for the CIA, because everybody hates the CIA, right? They're the whipping boy. Okay, right. So I think that was the script, is on the one hand say he's crazy, and on the other hand say he's not to be trusted because he's CIA. Well, I've been talking about the agencies that I worked for since I began my truth campaign in 2004. I'm not hiding the fact that I was conscripted into a secret DARPA program as a child, that I was conscripted into a secret CIA program in my late teens, because that's what happened. That's the thrust of my truth campaign, is to share with people what actually happened. Okay, so I think we have to be intelligent about this and recognize that the disinformation is not working, that these people might as well retire, because their disinformation on behalf of the cryptocracy, on behalf of the alphabet soup intelligence agencies like the CIA, like DARPA, like NASA, is not working.
I agree. And, everybody who's tried to attack us for some of the stories we've come out with, most recently with Richard Hoagland, it's all backfired on them, because you cannot fight solid evidence. And that's, and we'd never point the finger at somebody if we couldn't prove it. And, so I hear you. They might as well retire. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not working, we're paying for their work, ultimately. And when I look at these older baby boomers who've been compromised with this regime of disinformation and sabotage of the truth movement, I think of the phrase, lead, follow, or get out of the way.
That's right.
Because
Absolutely.
It's having a negative impact on our evolution as a society. There's no reason for this information to remain secret. The people of the United States and the people of the world deserve to know that we achieved time travel over 40 years ago, and they have a critical need to know that we have been placing U.S. personnel on Mars for over 30 years, And that's fraught with implications that the entire world should be examining, not just a few analysts working secretly for the U.S. government.
That's right. That's right. What is going on Mars now? I mean, what was the whole idea of all this? Why? I mean, by now there's got to be, a lot more who are there. And I know at one point it was just children that they were able to transport. But now I'm sure that.
No, that's not the case. Back in Pegasus,
No?
they needed children when they were working with the chronovisors because they were still trying to stabilize the hologram when a human being was inside of it. But now, 10 years forward, it's 1980. We go up to that 3-week course. Actually, let me go back to 1980, if I might, Michael, because before we move to the future, so that your listeners can get a sense of what evolved there in Shasta and what I'm talking about now in terms of everything that Brett and I have jogged from each other's memories. It's a miracle, really, that he approached me and that we've been able to do this, because after that 3 weeks, we both agree that we were taken to medical offices and subjected to some kind of brainwashing to sort of compartmentalize the Mars experiences that we would have and not talk about them. And in fact, we both went very deep with the Mars experiences for 30 years. So we're really talking about a major breakthrough here in the truth movement. Let me just start with who we've established was in the class. Ed Dames was lecturing to us, and there were 10 young people in the class. We've identified 5 of them. The first that we're certain was in the class was a young African-American from Hawaii who had just done a year at Occidental College named Barry Soetoro. And, of course, I first spoke of encountering Barack Obama on my first appearance on Coast in November of 2009, describing a meeting that occurred in 1982 in West Los Angeles. In fact, at the time of that interview, I remained blocked about the fact that Barry Soetoro, as he was then known, when he still, quite frankly, had his baby fat, he looked more like his high school pictures than his college pictures, had been one of our classmates in this M.A.R.S training program. The second person we've identified is Regina Elvira Dugan, who Barack Obama appointed director of DARPA on July 20th of 2009, literally on the 40th anniversary of the lunar landing. And then Brett and myself, and the fifth person that we know audited the class for about the first week was William Cameron McCool, who would go on and join the conventional space program as the pilot of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And sadly, Willie McCool lost his life during the Columbia disaster. We don't know the identity of the other 5 young people who were enrolled, but we know that my father, Raymond F. Basiago of Parsons, Brett's father, Thomas J. Stillings of Lockheed, and Stanley Ann Dunham, the mother of Barack Obama, were auditing the class. And we had encounters with Barack Obama where, for example, we learned his name when we were walking in and out of the building to our cars. And then Brett recently reminded me that I had told him that I was being schooled in a language and going through some intelligence data about the Martian civilization. And just recently, this is new information, I've recovered the memories of the fact that Barry Soetoro, Regina Dugan, and I were sequestered in a more elaborate program than just the lecture program that Ed was running. And we were basically spending a long period of time there writing a thesis, basically, which was in the nature of a threat assessment as to whether or not the Martian humanoid civilization could be trusted. We had been interacting with them at least by 1970, because that's when my dad and I had the encounter out at Curtis Wright with the 3 Martian aviators as they were leaving our planet. But one of the major thrusts of that summer was the 3-week lecture by Ed Dames. But then teleportation was used to sequester Barry, Regina, and I in a much more serious enterprise where we were going through this intelligence data, and we were each asked to arrive at a thesis as to whether or not the data demonstrated that the Martian humanoid civilization presented a threat to the humanoid civilization on Earth. That might explain why the intelligence apparatus exploded ferociously against me, even when I went public with my Mars data in 2008, because they're thinking, my God, this is one of the people that Major Dames trained in the summer of '80. We find his name here on this 10,000-page intelligence report that all these different analysts were feeding into with their insights. We have him here signing out at the building, the Hughes building at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, before going up to Mars via jump room. And now we've got his name on this paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, that, what do you know? It's in some of our files as a quantum artifact from the future, having been placed there by no later than the fall of 1971, which was when my father had me read the paper as a child. So it's clear that I was so immersed in the Mars issue as a result of my 2008 paper being teleported back to the past, them tasking my father to show me the paper and have me read it in 1971, and then the training under Major Ed Dames, contributing to the threat assessment regarding Mars, and then going up there, that the intelligence community basically panicked when I started going public with Mars. That would explain why I had all the street theater back in 2008 and 9. I'd go to my local grocery store, and right as I was grabbing a shopping cart, somebody with a Navy cap would grab the shopping cart and wrestle it away from me. In other words, I was basically being put on notice that I was under surveillance by the United States Navy. I had many incidents like that in the first 6 months, let's say, of 2009. But I went
do you ever
forward
worry?
publicly.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, do you ever worry about that? I mean, especially that you can link Obama to this type of thing. I mean, does that ever concern you?
You know, it's something that I'm wary of. Like you look both ways before you cross the street. But my position is we have to remind ourselves, what was animating the great avatars like Jesus and Lincoln and Gandhi, people like that. Why did they possess a fearlessness about death, and why were they able to complete their missions on Earth? The reason is that they understood and they internalized the truth that while we're mortal, while we're on Earth, we are eternal beings. And if we're going to identify with our true nature, we have to live fearlessly and complete our destinies, because we're going to die anyway, in some context anyway, as a result of old age, disease, or accident, or homicide. So if you're afraid of homicide for completing your mission, or if you're afraid of dying for getting on an airplane to go somewhere and in furtherance of your mission, you're not really living fully. So I'm not afraid of being assassinated. I certainly take precautions to avoid it, but I'm trying to live fearlessly, because that's the best way to live, because ultimately we do survive life. So why cling greedily to it? It doesn't make sense.
And it does. It absolutely does. And, that's what I envy about people who come out and speak the truth, whatever that might be, is, you have to be fearless, because as soon as you start fearing what they might do to you, that's what they want. They want you to do that, because then their agenda continues. So my hat's off to you.
I mean, they can kill your body, but they can't kill your soul, right? So why be
afraid? That's right.
And so
the message will go on.
Yeah, so I would laugh that off, and also I think there's a factor that I really can't predict right now, but maybe I will be able to learn if I do reach the White House, and that is, I think there's I bet you dollars to donuts that I actually have strong support among at least a certain plurality in the military and intelligence community, because I think a lot of people who have served the executive branch, probably even some of the former presidents, recognize that secrecy is really a problem.
It is.
It's basically a dilemma within the culture of government itself that's difficult for individuals to address while they're in office, because it's the way things are done. So I wouldn't be surprised if I have a discussion someday with a Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George W. Bush, and I find that, I really tried to do something about secrecy, but I just really couldn't get outside the system. It requires spirited individual outsiders to apply the public pressure to move the people towards, of the United States, towards reforming their own government and whittling away at this oppressive regime of secrecy, which at this point is even preventing us from knowing what our own fathers achieved for the U.S. defense technical community during a period of explosive growth in applied science. I mean, we learned about the astronauts and how the lunar landing was achieved and so forth, but we never learned about what they achieved with all those trillions of dollars of funding that was going to the atomic research community. They couldn't all have been working on more destructive thermonuclear weapons. Okay, so much has been secreted, and I believe it comprises the technology, the technical infrastructure of the 21st century. So we're going to have to engage in a broader definition of the truth movement, one which encompasses a truth and amnesty process in government, in which insiders can come forward and testify before the Senate about what they worked on and really how amazing and even bizarre some of the things that we've accomplished have been.
Oh yeah, there's so much going on behind the scenes. I think it would make most people's heads spin. They just cannot believe that this type of thing goes on, but it does. And I know we're far more advanced technology-wise, and teleportation. I don't discount that at all. I definitely believe that that's a possibility, and I do believe that there's at least bases on Mars and the Moon. So, there's a lot that people aren't told, and when you bring this kind of stuff up, some people go, oh, you're crazy. Well, unless they can prove it not being true, then, how can you criticize something when you don't have all the information on it, when you don't know yourself? And, this is a fascinating story, Andrew. I want to take our last break for this segment here and come back and talk some more with you about this. One listener had asked me about the Abraham Lincoln when you teleported at the time of Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if you want to get into that at some point.
No, that's been told in many other venues. I would refer that listener to the long interview that I did regarding my trip to Gettysburg when I was a child in Project Pegasus that I did.
You did a 5-hour interview with me one time on this show, and it's all covered in that as well.
Yeah, I've done a number of interviews regarding some of the specific trips that I took. I think I'd like to really focus on the new information I'm sharing about Mars tonight. You asked a question, Michael, where do I think we are now? Let me just kind of give the bookends of where we were in 1980 and where I think we are now in terms of the presence on Mars. When we were being sent up there, all that existed on the Martian surface were the jump room infrastructure that received the elevator-like devices that we were walking into, that we were basically taking to Mars. The jump room that I always used to get up there was located in a Hughes aircraft building at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California. That device would basically begin morphing from a box-like structure to a cylindrical form about 5 minutes into the trip. So that about 10 minutes into the trip, that morphing of the device itself would culminate where you were literally standing inside a cylinder, and the roof of the elevator had become the end of the cylinder. So we had to sort of practice righting ourselves with our hand against the wall as this box-like form was morphing into a cylinder and swirling at the end of the cylinder. That would begin to correct itself after about 10 minutes of that, and then 5 minutes after that, the door would open and we were on Mars. Now, there were different jump room facilities on Mars, but beyond that, there were not U.S. bases. If there were, I certainly wasn't in them. And I think Brett and I would agree that there were bases in the sense that there were some supporting facilities like locker rooms, and storage rooms in some of these jump room locations on the surface, some of which clearly showed expertise in building semi-underground facilities like is done at mining projects. That may explain the involvement of my dad and Parsons. I mean, until a few years ago, Parsons was still bragging about doing a lot of the deep underground military base construction for the Defense Department with the huge drilling machines that they have. So when we were going up there from 1981 to 83, there was a U.S. presence, but there weren't elaborate bases. But we were told something very interesting. In fact, indeed, I think it's full of importance by Major Dames when we were being trained. When he was going through the segment of our training seminar on predators on the surface, he made a statement that Brett remembered and that I corroborate, which was Of the 97,000 individuals that we've already sent up to Mars, only 7,000 have survived after 5 years. Okay, so that provides the context. Basically, we were going up there. We were then walking from the jump room facilities and walking around the surface, and some people were being picked off. I mean, I saw 2 of my team members devoured by the small dinosaur-like creatures that we could not outrun.
Oh, wow.
About a middle-aged male, and then actually somebody around my age. Okay, so we were being sent up there to go there, not to join bases there. Okay, we were in a frontier situation. Now, why were we being placed in danger like that? Well, the first thing that I was told about the whys and the wherefores of the program is what Courtney M. Hunt, who was the CIA agent who continued in the summer of 1981 giving me additional training that I hadn't received under it, Major Dames during the summer of 1980 previously. Courtney trained me at a chemistry lab over at Cal State Northridge and how to use the respiration device that I was provided, which I used but took off during my first trip to Mars in July of 81. And he also took me over to Lockheed Skunk Works, where Brett's father was working, to train in this video simulation room to look for predators on the surface and kind of practice taking 90 and 180 degree turns and always sort of remain wary of predators on the surface. So in that period when he was training me, giving me additional training, I asked Courtney Hunt, why are we going up there and being placed in danger like this? And he said that it was the hope of the United States government to use Mars to establish an extraterrestrial defense regime protecting Earth. And by that, Michael, I don't mean a regime to protect the Earth from extraterrestrials. I'm sure that Dr. Sala would take issue with me on that claim, because the extraterrestrials that have been visiting us have largely been non-threatening. That is to say, those from distant time-space, the interstellar travelers that have been reaching us have proven themselves to not necessarily be a threat, to usually be benevolent or at least neutral towards us, not hostile. By an extraterrestrial defense regime, I think that Hunt meant anything that might come into Earth, because, of course, Mars is on an irregular orbit with Earth, with the Earth. And so if there was going to be an asteroid coming in or a comet that might strike the Earth and do great damage, such as happened 11,500 years ago, it was some kind of a solar system catastrophe that actually ended the first civilization on Earth, the great maritime civilization that had built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. So they were trying to create a defense regime where Mars would be used as a platform to protect the Earth, because anything that hit the respective planet would only hit both planets if it occurred when they were near each other. And, and Mars is only near Earth every 2 years. When it's not, it's on this irregular orbit away from Earth. The second thing that they were trying to achieve in furtherance of that policy was to place as many civilians as possible, not soldiers, not aviators, and not diplomats, but citizens on the surface of Mars. And Brett and I and Barry and Regina became the 100,000th series of that. We weren't pioneers. I mean, we were in a frontier situation, but we weren't the first people placed up there. Because as Dames said, of the 97,000 we've already sent there, only 7,000 have survived after 5 years. I think he was referring to settlers who've been placed there permanently. And certainly in his account, Michael...
I was going to say, those don't sound like good numbers.
No, we looked at each other like, oh, great, we're on a suicide mission when he said that. But I think he was referring to those that were being urged to go up there and stay there, to try to live there. We were just visitors. And Michael Relf, in his account, describes this pattern of some people being permanent settlers, if you will, and others just being visitors. So in the furtherance of that extraterrestrial defense regime that they wanted to use Mars for, they wanted to create the basis for the U.S. ultimately asserting territorial sovereignty over Mars. And that would be achieved by sending literally hundreds of thousands of civilians. In a more immediate sense, Dames explained to us that we were being sent to go up there and leave the jump room facilities and walk around and hopefully not confront the predators that we wouldn't be able to outrun, but certainly run away from or use our gun to shoot predators that might attack us that we could outrun, and also obviously to be wary of the different forms of humanoids on the surface, because we weren't sure about the Martian agenda. That was a major focus of the threat assessment. That was the focus of the threat assessment that Barry and Regina and I were working on it together but independently for a number of months there at College of the Siskiyous. So they wanted to put us up there to acclimate the Martian humanoids and animals to our presence, because they were expecting greater and greater numbers of Earthlings to be sent up there. And Brett remembers that Dames joked. So to put it bluntly, simply put, your duty is to go up there and be seen and not eaten. Okay, so we were in an acclimation trip vis-a-vis the Martian life forms. Now, flash forward 25 years to 2005. Okay, I first went up to Mars in 1981 when I was 19 years old. In July of 1981, I was 19. Now, flash forward to 2005, 6, and 7. 2005, Brett was having government agents infiltrating his life, telling him that in a few short years, you're going to be publicly associated with somebody important whose name is Andy. I also had my life infiltrated by CIA at that point. So CIA knew that something was coming in terms of our truth campaign to increase public awareness of the fact that we've reached Mars. Now take it a year forward to 2006 and 7. It was in that time period, 25 years after I first went up, that Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower, was approached to go up to Mars to become a colonist. And in fact, her two young sons, Gavin and Garrick, were expected to be going with her. So Laura was subjected to a very extensive manipulation in 2006 and 7 to sort of get her mind around the fact that the government wanted her to do this brave thing of leave her past behind and bring her boys up to the permanent Mars colony that's now there. Now, what information do we have about what's up there now? We have the photograph that the great ufologist Bob Dean first publicly released at the European Exopolitics Summit in 2009, showing one of the large U.S. bases on the Martian surface. We have Laura's account of being invited to go up and join the bases up there. But we also have 4 whistleblowers who now affirm the existence of the jump room technology that is used to get people there, that the secret space program achieved back in the early 70s under Pegasus, and that's been brought forward to place literally hundreds of thousands of people in that colony. And those individuals are Michael Relf, who talked about being sent up there the first time in 1976 via jump room. And then right around the same time, I came forward when Arthur Neumann was coming forward. Arthur Neumann is the Henry Deacon informant for Project Camelot. I began talking about going up there in 1981 through 83. Arthur did an interview with Project Camelot as Henry Deacon and revealed that he was sent up in recent years up to the secret Mars colony for a briefing of NSA and Martian officials via jump room. And now we have Brett Stillings corroborating my account and also affirming the fact that he was reaching Mars via jump room before he could even drive. I mean, his father was driving him over to the CIA building, which is about 2 kilometers from 999 North Sepulveda, getting the respiration equipment that he was assigned, and then going over to the jump room at 999 North Sepulveda. So we have 4 individuals with no criminal history, no record of insanity or false claims, who have stepped forward and at risk of their professional and personal reputations corroborated each other's accounts of this jump room technology. I might add actually a 6th informant in addition to Laura, and that is David Wilcock, the brilliant physicist who's been telling us a lot actually about the time travel capability and the secret Mars colony. David stated in a December 08, January 09 timeframe appearance on Coast to Coast AM that he had been briefed by a Defense Department insider who stated that the size of the Mars colony is now 550,000 individuals. That was
Wow.
actually your question. Now, why do I believe that that's a good estimate? Well, 100,000 people had already been sent at the time that Brett and I and Barry, I call Barack Obama Barry because that's the name he was going by when we were working with him in the project. When he was our peer in the Mars visitation program. We were told that we were going to be about the 100,000th visitors, and so if you take that benchmark of 100,000 already being placed on Mars by 1980, and the fact that Laura and her sons were going to be going to a colony that was fully equipped, where presumably she wouldn't have been at risk of predation on the surface like we were, because the kind of large bases that Bob Dean has shown evidence of, photographic evidence of, are now in place on the Martian surface. I think that David's estimate, the one that he states that he received from an intelligence community insider, is probably just about what the size of the Mars colony is, because if they were gradually adding people via jump room, at a certain point you would reach the carrying capacity of Mars. Mars has an atmosphere, it has deposits of water, it has some minimal vegetation, but it is a much more dire environment than exists on Earth. We should really realize how blessed we are to enjoy the bounty of this terrestrial sphere that we live in, because Mars is relatively miserable in terms of its life support, naturally speaking, as a planet. So I would think that after 30 years of placing several 100,000 more people up there, maybe even 400,000 more, quadrupling the size of the colony at the time that it existed, sort of in disparate, sort of isolated enclaves in 1980. By the time that those people succeeded in building very large structures, let's say the size of a metropolitan shopping mall, okay, they're that big.
Wow.
They would be able to get about 500,000 people in that colony, but not more, because every last person would probably have to be sustained by food and water and other provisions, clothing and so forth, medicine, that would have to be constantly arriving via jump room. And, we do that with modern cities. I mean, we move a massive amount of food and provisions into our major metropolitan areas, but doing that via jump room to Mars would be a major undertaking. So I think at a certain point, recognizing the carrying capacity of Mars, they would have capped it at about 500,000 people. So I regard that estimate that was publicized by David Wilcock as probably authoritative. But I don't have any insider information indicating how many people are actually there today.
Are they actually growing food in domes up there? Or, how are they eating? How are they making sure that their water's pure? And how are they surviving with these predators as well?
Well, clearly let me address the latter question first. If they're now in large structures, they have no need to interact on the surface with predators. Among the things that NASA was exploring, even going back to the 1960s, was developing food in the nature of a yogurt-like paste from algae, which could be done under geodesic domes or other biohabitat. We have the apparent evidence of Biostation Alpha, which was discovered recently and created somewhat of a sensation on the Internet. That may be one of the contained environments. I'm not sure it's big enough to even focus on. Another approach that NASA was contemplating in the 1960s was using hydroponics to grow edible vegetation under large structures, geodesic domes, habitat-like containment structures, and so forth. But I don't have original information about how many people are up there or how they're surviving. I'm just offering my opinion that David's estimate is probably pretty close to the reality.
I see. Okay. So now are they, I've heard that there's, I know Alfred said that there's animals running around up there, and that there's, actually that you can live in that environment for a short period of time. Would that say that, was there ever life there before? We've seen monuments like the face on Mars, and these pyramids, and all this other stuff.
Yep.
So, at one point it must have been somewhat inhabitable.
Well, it clearly was more inhabitable before the solar system catastrophe. My position, looking at everything I know and I've experienced, and also what's just readily available in NASA's images, is that just like Earth, Mars is the repository of ancient artifacts, had a civilization in antiquity that was clearly severely damaged by the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC. but that human life and some animal life survived underground and on the surface. So the first sort of Mars that we need to get our minds wrapped around is, the M.A.R.S. That's the repository of ancient artifacts. And in fact, that's the M.A.R.S. that Hoagland and Barra and Munk did a very intelligent paper around when they established that the D&M pyramid complex adjacent to the face on Mars at Cydonia corresponds to the Giza Plateau and the Great Pyramid. That again is the Egyptian presence on Mars. So there was an ancient civilization on both Earth and Mars that was linked. We don't know which was the colony of the other. I think that Mars was probably the colony of the High Egyptian civilization. Okay, so that civilization now has been extensively mapped. And there isn't just one face on Mars staring up at us. There are hundreds. And that's what Gary Legier, who goes by the handle Mad Martian, has been trying to increase public awareness of, the fact that there's been this single-issue focus on Cydonia, fomented by Richard Hoagland and others, but in fact, Mars is the repository of stunning artifacts of different design all over the surface. I mean, in July of 2009, when my M.A.R.S. classmate Regina was being appointed director of DARPA, I had just discovered a set of large terraforms in a European Space Agency photograph of a natural landform, basically an extinct water channel, possibly still with some water in it, but an ancient water channel on Mars called the Rule Vallis. And there we see literally 9 faces and profiles of primates, humans, monkeys. In fact, one has a sort of a mad scientist, like an Einstein figure, next to the brutish figure of a gorilla. So, there are many, many faces on Mars. I speak in terms of the 1,000 faces of Mars, not the face on Mars. Mars also has a planetary ecology. As Brett and I have affirmed, there's very sparse vegetation. Most of it is barren desert, but there's small grasses and worts along many areas of the soil, and also patches of vegetation, just like you would find in a desert on Earth, a desert for the most part devoid of animal and human life, but where very effective land-based predators have survived. There's also the indigenous civilization, which I had contact with 3 humanoids in 1970, and what Brett is now coming forward with is the fact that after we were going up there from 1981 to 83, he had contact with Martians in Southern California. So as many people now ask the obvious question, if you had jump rooms to Mars that were binary, in other words, a jump room facility greeted you on the other end, are the Martians using the jump rooms to come here? Well, yes, they've even been dropped into the Los Angeles region, undetected. Brett talks about people connected to the aerospace and intelligence community in Southern California doing things like going out on shopping runs to local department stores to get cheap sneakers that the Martians wear when they're on Earth rather than walking around barefoot. Okay, so there's much to be told about the fact that the Martians have also come here. I don't have a lot of information on that, but I'm sure that as the Mars cover-up unravels, we'll have more insider testimony about that fact. Because somebody will conclude.
I was just going to say, I hope so, because we know that there's a lot being hidden about Mars. Just having contact and have developed a relationship with Gary, I've learned a lot more about it, and researching into it myself. I do know of other faces on Mars that one Mr. Hoagland doesn't want to release to the public, but he knows about it. So there is a lot more going on up there than meets the eye, that's for sure. Now, with these Mars missions that they do, say NASA does, in my opinion, our cover-up space program, they send these probes up there. Are they strategically putting them in places to make us believe that there's nothing up there? I mean, that's like Earth. If something landed,
I was never high enough up to determine whether they're strategically placed. We know that they were tactically placed in the sense that I visited 4 jump rooms. The first was placed like in a cavern, and I've described in some of my radio interviews that first and second trip in July and August of '81 where I arrived via jump room kind of in the sub-basement of this ancient cavern where there had been modern infrastructure that had been cobbled together inside a cavern, and I walked up a set of stairs, or not a set of stairs, but stairs up through a skull onto the surface. There was another jump room that Brett was at, as well as Barack Obama and Regina Dugan, that we called the corkscrew because it had a spiral pattern where we would arrive on one level of a column that was not unlike an elevator shaft in a deep mining operation. And so the jump room would arrive somewhere on one of these 7 or 8 levels. And then when we walked out of the door, we would walk circularly out of the building up to the surface on a spiral-like rampart. There was also one that was like a long hallway. Brett and I also remember an incident in which we walked out of one of the jump rooms, and I pointed out to him and Courtney Hunt of the CIA that there was a gray ET up on the roof of the jump room facility. So that indicates that Brett and I were at 3 different jump rooms, and I first went to one that Brett never went to. So there were at least 4 jump rooms that we were sent to, excuse me, which indicates that we were going to different jump rooms, and they had different jump room facilities. Now, where they decided to place those on the surface, we have no idea, but it was almost as if part of the exercise, one of the purposes of the exercise, was to have us jump up to these different jump rooms so they could, at some point, submit a list to the UN and say, you know, here are the 500,000 citizens we've placed on Mars, and here are the locations they visited. So I think it was probably tactically linked to that strange that strange goal they had of actually someday asserting U.S. territorial sovereignty to the planet Mars.
I see. All right, Andrew, we're up on another break here. So we get a lot who, you know, some who feel that the story is amazing, and I'm one of those people who believe this is just absolutely amazing. But I also believe it's very possible. There's some who just have trouble grasping that this can be so. Is there any evidence that people could be directed to as far as this goes, whether it be pictures or anything, and maybe you can give out websites or whatever to direct them? Because, you know, some people find it hard to believe.
We have different forms of evidence. One thing I would note as a practicing lawyer is that testimony regarding direct personal experience is not hearsay. It is direct evidence. Now, when that evidence is corroborated by other participants, a jury is free to listen to that evidence and evaluate it and determine whether or not they believe multiple informants are telling the truth. So we're at that stage. We have corroborating testimony from Michael Relf, myself, Arthur Neumann, William Brett Stillings, and Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, who I might add, as we know, is somebody whose origins are in a presidential family. And if you think of the great social status that the U.S. presidency possesses, and hence sort of just the halo of respectability and admiration that the member of any presidential family who has discharged themselves as ethically and even elegantly as Laura has in her life, why would she be motivated to be telling a strange story about being invited to go up to a secret colony on Mars? And how is it that people separated by a quarter century of experience can corroborate that there are bases there? So we have not just one witness, myself. We have a group of 5 individuals, and there's also, actually, I mentioned an assistant to President Nixon has come forward. He has a different theory, actually, of what we were doing, so I may very well be revealing that person's testimony. I still have to make a determination. But we have 5 witnesses. We have photographic evidence. How can we explain away the large structure that Bob Dean has brought forward? We also have to think about the surrounding context of our claims. I often say that between what the public has been told and what the U.S. government has actually achieved in terms of applied science and secret space exploration falls everything that exists under the umbrella of state secrecy. I mean, we were constantly fed for 60 years the idea that secrecy existed to to hide our most advanced weaponry. Well, that's not possible. Even an agency like DARPA has spent trillions of dollars in secret. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the state of New Mexico is one big military reservation. I mean, one of the 24, 25-year-old staff members from Project Pegasus ended up governor of New Mexico, and that is Governor Bill Richardson. One of the fairly low-level attaché, defense attaché between the project and the Department of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, ended up becoming the person who served the longest number of days twice as Secretary of Defense. So we have to step back and evaluate accurately the historical context in which we're making our claims. I mean, we're stepping forward from the realm of secret government activity, and there's much that recommends our testimony. Not only that, for example, the four of us don't really know each other very well. I've offered my father's resume. I've offered the identity of people in the intelligence community that I worked with whose identity at CIA I shouldn't know, like Courtney M. Hunt. Brett and I, when we joined forces to bring our memories forward and then share those with the public, we had the input of our respective fathers' careers in the aerospace community. I mean, we're not nobodies. We're somebodies. Okay? So because these projects were secret, it's not like we can pull out a document with Richard Nixon's signature on it directing, DARPA to involve me in Project Pegasus, nor President Reagan's signature establishing who went to Mars for us in the early 80s. The information was too compartmentalized than that, but the compartments are leaking because people who don't know each other, who participated in advanced activities of this nature at different times, are nonetheless telling a very coherent story as an ensemble. There's a saying, it takes many voices to make harmony. Well, our claims are harmonizing. That Mars is being reached, has been reached for 30 years, and it's being reached by a revolutionary time travel technology called the jump room. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know how the technology worked. We've been guardedly saying that it involved teleportation, but I'm not even sure that the jump rooms were teleportation-based. They may have been something else. Okay, so the public has to accept the fact, it has to confront the data authentically and say, wait a minute. In some cases, we can't get the kind of dispositive information about these secret projects that we could get in our personal life when somebody was making a claim, because the information isn't being shared with us. That's the problem. But they have to ask themselves, who are these people? Why would they be motivated to come forward in this way? I mean, I'm a practicing lawyer. I haven't even published my first book about my claims. If I was just trying to sell a book for profit, why would I have put my revelation of the information over my publication of my book for a number of years now? Why would the member of the presidential family come forward? Why would somebody like Arthur Neumann show his diplomatic passport and have it be photographed at Barcelona so that Alfred could republish it? Let me go into two other areas. Let me just juxtapose President Obama's behavior versus the real valor that Alfred Lambermont Weber has shown, because something very important has happened. Two things have happened very important in exopolitics beyond the ongoing revelations that Brett and Laura and I are, and certainly Michael did and Arthur participated in, are making. The first is that even though everybody knows that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, in fact, more people believe that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, more Americans believe, let me go back and cite my source. The ABC Roper poll in 2001 established that more Americans believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials than voted for George W. Bush for president in 1980. Okay, so the American people believe, broadly speaking, there's a societal consensus that 60 years of close encounter data, the abduction phenomenon, the thousands and thousands of pictures that were gathered of extraterrestrial craft by somebody like, let's say, a researcher like Wendell Stevens, the 10,000 or more pilot sightings that had already been published by 1989, that all this is a brief for the conclusion in natural history that we're being visited by extraterrestrial beings in spaceships, or as I actually prefer to describe them, interdimensional beings in time ships, because that's ultimately what I think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, why, in the face of that, would the intelligence apparatus, as it relates to the U.S. presidency, have Barack Obama reify the Robertson panel belief or prevailing disbelief, in which they would literally have him state that we're not being visited by extraterrestrials and that the U.S. government has no evidence of extraterrestrials or of extraterrestrial visitation to Earth? Think of the cosmic irony of the fact that if my claims and Brett's and clearly others who are going to come forward accurately link Barack Obama to the secret space program and to Mars visitation when we were in our late teens 31 years ago, actually 28 to 31 years ago. Think of the cosmic irony at the very time that spirited private citizens were revealing that to their fellow citizens. An individual from the secret space program serving as president would have the audacity, talk about the audacity of hope, how about just the audacity of coming forward and supporting the hackneyed, the disbelieved, the shop-worn notion that we're not being visited. Now flash forward to what happened recently in Alfred's life. Alfred published that brilliant piece right before Brett and Laura and I appeared on Coast on November 10th of 2011 and has now had his position at the Examiner, something that as a distinguished political scientist and a distinguished lawyer, indeed jurist, and as the founder of Exopolitics should have enjoyed as a lifetime cynosure, he has had his position at the Examiner terminated. And all of the articles he's written about the secret space program have been pulled by a left-leaning Denver Examiner, that's the examiner.com, in a rank instance of censorship. So are we still living in the 70s? Well, in some way, we're still living in the 50s. If they're having a young black Democratic president who I allege participated in the secret space program as a Mars visitor, resuscitate the completely disbelieved, ridiculous notion that we're not being visited by extraterrestrials, while literally targeting the founder of Exopolitics for censorship, how can that not become a brief that they're not covering up the Mars cover-up for no reason? They're motivated. They're motivated to have people like Hoagland defame me as a kook or a CIA operative, to shut Alfred down at the Examiner, and to have Barack Obama, who's been playing the insider game since he was 19 years old, step in front of the American people and make the absurd assertion that we're not being visited and the U.S. government has no evidence of that. And so I would assert that the mere fact that they had the President of the United States state the silly notion that we're not being visited by extraterrestrials, when thousands of photographs of their craft exist, when we've had the kind of testimony that we had in early 2001 from numerous insiders that stepped forward and provided direct personal testimony under the aegis of the Disclosure Project press conference that was held at the National Press Club that was organized by Dr. Stephen Greer. How can at this late date anybody assert that we're not being visited by extraterrestrials, or as I would maintain, interdimensionals in time ships? It's just a ridiculous notion. So we really see that we're living in the end of a regime. And what the ancien regime wants, the American ancien regime wants, is to perpetuate a situation on the one hand where Americans' civil liberties are taken away, and on the other hand where they're kept in this kind of cosmic kindergarten where they never ask any questions about the life-advantaging technologies that the U.S. government is holding back from humanity. They never ask the questions that a Ben Franklin or a Thomas Jefferson or a George Washington or a John Adams would have asked about the nature of our universe. And that is, are we alone or not? And if we know as the government that we're not alone in the universe, don't we have a duty as the stewards of the American Republic to reveal that to the people? Wouldn't Thomas Jefferson maintain that position? Wouldn't he embrace that position? Wouldn't Benjamin Franklin? I mean, I'm speaking out, and I'm going to be pursuing the presidency around this, because that's the functional way that our American Republic should be performing, and it's not. It's having a brilliant Harvard-educated and Columbia-educated president step before the American people and speak nonsense about the question of the existence of extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, in my opinion, every time that they tell the American people, they being the government, when they address it and say, oh, there's absolutely no evidence, we've never been able to found that there's life on other planets or visiting this planet, they're pretty much telling every American citizen that you're just too stupid and, you're going to buy our same old stories every time. I mean, there's too much sightings, too many videos, you could discount a lot of it, but you can't discount every single account that people claim to have had. I've seen UFOs myself. I've witnessed them myself, so I know they exist. And it's just
Michael, my
how
late
stupid
father
do
and
they think we are?
Yeah, I described my dad's work on the ramjet, where he had been working at Okanite Company in Paramus, New Jersey, and it was either an Air Force or an Army colonel appeared at the side of his desk and ordered him to report to Curtis Wright the next Monday to begin working on the ramjet, okay, to create a plane that would be supersonic and that could operate both in our atmosphere and in the near-Earth environment, either driving molecules of air through that ramjet engine or space dust. He also worked, as I mentioned, on the instrumentation for the B-70, which was the revived strategic bomber from the World War II that they hoped to put an atomic power source on. And unfortunately, it was the flying Chernobyl. I'm actually glad that plane was never launched because my dad did contribute to the instrumentation on that. In the late 1960s, I think it was around 1966-67, my father and I were watching a New York Mets game on television, and we heard the whop, whop, whop of 3 multi-rotor helicopters. We walked down the street, and flying on a vector roughly from Philadelphia to New York City, from the orientation of our hometown there, which was Morris Plains, New Jersey, was a flying saucer that was wobbling, that was so large that the 3 Chinook helicopters that were escorting it, if size reference, let's say if the UFO was size reference to the size of a pelican, these helicopters were about the size of a mosquito next to it. Now, my father was a trained observer. And I said, Dad, are they towing it? And he said, no. And I said, how do you know? And he said, because that thing would pull those helicopters out of the sky. And then he said, come on, son, after it flew past, and we could hear people down the street looking up and talking about it. He said, come on, son, let's go back and finish watching the baseball game. And my dad said, kind of almost to himself, but to me he said, I can tell you this, it wasn't built by any country on this planet. Now, that was the statement of a trained observer. When Barack Obama and I were not yet 10 years old, we're now 50. And we're still seeing that the U.S. government is lying to the people about this critical cosmological issue of whether or not we're alone in the cosmos, in the universe. And so I'm troubled by that, and I think everybody should. When we also see the concomitant push towards taking our civil liberties away, we're really caught in both a political and a philosophical crisis here, one in which the U.S. government is becoming anathema to our interests, and that's going to lead, I think, to the pre-revolutionary ferment that we're going to see by 2015.
Okay. So what else can you tell us about M.A.R.S., about what maybe some of the future plans are, possibly, and maybe what is held in our future? What kind of things did you see coming up in the near future here for us here on Earth? Because, as we pointed out, things don't look too good right now.
Well, they clearly knew that the first civilization on Earth had been almost completely destroyed when something entered the solar system. Some have conjectured that it was debris elements from the Vela supernova explosion. They know that it rained debris all over the Earth after striking Mars. And Mars was so severely hit that a large part of its atmosphere was removed, that's to say its ionosphere. When I asked Courtney Hunt, well, how are we breathing on this planet unassisted? Where's the oxygen coming from? He said from the lithosphere, that they had determined that the oxygen on Mars was actually leaching from its rocks. But they knew, as a result of analyzing the anthropological and archaeological data, that Mars was struck by the same debris from space and squished into more of an oblate spheroid than the Earth even is. And that that civilization on Earth that I believe had placed personnel on Mars. And the reason, we have findings at the Mars Anomaly Research Society that establish the Egyptian presence, the high Egyptian presence, and go beyond the findings of Hoagland and others regarding the satellite, what was found in the satellite data. For example, Ross Curley of my organization found a carving of the head of a pharaoh in a rock on Mars that is indisputably a pharaoh with both European and African features, a male, with the cobra ready to strike motif at the base of his conical headdress. And so that literally shows the fingerprint of the high Egyptian civilization on Mars. So we've known for many decades that Earth and Mars were both involved in an extremely devastating event that almost eclipsed life on Mars, severely damaged the Earth, and certainly eclipsed civilization on Earth. We would not recover as a civilization until around 3000 BC in ancient Sumer. Now, that starting point is disputed. Some people say, Michael Tellinger says it was around 6000 BC, that with the help of the Anunnaki, we began to recover and build the second civilization that we ourselves are currently living in. I was told as a schoolchild in Project Pegasus that it was around 3000 BC, not via the Anunnaki, but via benevolent intervention by the Greys, that the second civilization was kick-started, in mathematics and writing and other civilization boosting inputs were reintroduced into the Earth to uplift civilization. And we've been on an upward development course since then in the last 5,000 years. And of course that dating would correlate with the Hebrew calendar and also the 5,000-year dating of contemporary civilization that's practiced within Freemasonry. Now that corresponds with what we were told by the Defense Department in some of our lectures in Project Pegasus. It was around 3000 BC that the Greys helped us get back on our feet, and we began building the current civilization that we're in. Of course, Gandhi observed that, he thought, when he was asked about Western civilization, he said, I think it would be a good idea. So I'm using the phrase civilization simply to mean increasing mastery over the environment, not necessarily the creation of an advanced, spiritually guided civilization. So the U.S. Defense Department was aware of this and the CIA when the Mars program was begun. And so what needs to be shared with the people is what is the U.S. government's apprehension regarding a second catastrophe that could befall our planet. Graham Hancock did a brilliant wrote a brilliant book called The Mars Mystery, where he explored this question of whether, of what happened that devastated Earth and Mars, and whether it might be a repeating event. It might involve a large group of rocks that are going to cycle back and strike us again. And so I'm not opposed to a space program using Mars as a defense platform. Lauren Eisenhower and I actually published a joint statement in 2010 where we stated that, look, contingency planning for mass disaster that would result in the broad diversity of the human genome being preserved on another planet is an intelligent thing for our civilization to do. But it falls apart when you don't reveal to the people that you're doing it, when you don't provide for maximum genetic diversity of human individuals that would be placed in a survival colony on a planet like Mars, when you keep the potential cause of the catastrophe secret from the population. So I would actually pose those as questions, not as answers that I could provide. It may be that contingency planning is going on to save the human genome in the event of a second catastrophe befalling civilization, but then I think we have to ask the questions. Is this some kind of white racist project? Our group of 10, among the 10 visitors who were being trained in the group that Brett and I were in, there was only one African American, and his ancestry was at least 50% European. And so we have to ask questions of basic genetic science. The fact, for example, that a species of anything maximizes its chances of surviving by optimizing its genetic diversity, and that would indicate, for example, that we would want to put representatives of every genotype on Earth in a survival colony on Mars. If there are 500,000 people up there, like David Wilcock asserts, Laura and I agree that that should be composed as a kind of an arc of every strata of human being, not just of Caucasian Americans, I mean, because look, if the Earth is, let's say, destroyed and we have the human genome surviving on Mars, in order to repopulate civilization in the cosmos, we would be optimizing our fate as a species by providing for maximum genetic diversity. So that's a major issue. But I think the people also have a right to know whether a catastrophe is coming. People might live differently. They might make philosophical and religious decisions. They might make provisions for their own survival that they have a right to make as biological organisms. So I'm not providing answers as to why we have a presence on Mars. I'm just sharing what I was told. For example, when I challenged Courtney Hunt of the CIA and said, look, why do I have to go up there? He stated categorically in the summer of 1981, because the survival of the human race depends on it. So there was a survival
that's what I've
agenda.
been getting. I'm saying that's what I've been hearing. You know, the survival of the human race does depend on a lot of things, and it's all been kept secret. So, you know, thankfully there are people coming out, and you know, evidence of the past on this planet clearly shows that there's been huge events that have wiped out the human race here, and somebody's receding. You know, somehow we're getting back here, so, you know.
Right, and Project Camelot did a lot of good work on the fact that there are very credible stories establishing that some world governments, for example, they did that piece with it was an anonymous interview, but with that Norwegian official, indicating that different government officials of various countries of the earth are not only being briefed about a disaster, but also being provided passes to the deep underground military bases where they hope to survive. I mean, for my own part, I've made the philosophical decision that I don't want to survive any catastrophe after which the living would envy the dead. I would prefer to be among the dead. Others may have more of a handhold on this world than that, and that's their right. People have a right to make their own choice about what to prepare for. I don't think it makes sense to prepare for mass disaster, because ultimately such an event probably would defeat any kind of survival stratagem that somebody would superficially impose in a structured way on their own existence. And the survivors would ultimately be survivors who would survive as a result of accident, of the fact that they were driving through a tunnel in their car at the time that the worst stuff hits us, or whatever in fact they have been preparing for, or that they were underground in their cellar, or in a deep underground military base just accidentally when we were hit. So I just don't want to survive a mass disaster. I don't want to cling greedily to life and not embrace my eternal nature in order to stay in this terrestrial sphere when life here would become quite miserable.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't want to survive it either, because you think, you know, we hear a lot of talk of Planet X and even an asteroid hitting. It would cause so much that when you did come up from underground, if you weren't buried alive, you know, what would be left? I mean,
well, the asteroid strike that hit in 400 AD reduced the European population to 25,000 individuals. I mean, if that happened again, I wouldn't want to be one of those 25,000 individuals who survived. Simply wouldn't want to. There'd be nuclear winter conditions for several growing cycles, and what people would be doing to survive, like excavating cadavers, would just be hideous. Who would want to do it? It would be the Irish potato famine, you know, times 100. So I would have no desire to live in that kind of devastated earth. So again, there's also the possibility that, you know, because they were gathering information about the future using time travel technologies, some of which were reliable in the sense that they framed the dispositive future, and others which were known to be unreliable. Another dimension of this is the possibility that they've waged a very expensive boondoggle in doing things like establishing the continuity of government program in the deep underground military bases. They may have been spending trillions of dollars for a disaster that doesn't come.
That's right.
And that's
right.
an important public policy issue.
Right. And, you know, one caller called in one night and had a great theory. He says, what if all the elite, they have all these underground bases, we know they exist, and we know that they're preparing for something. Who knows what, but we can all speculate. But what if they all get in there and then this big event happens, and they all get buried in there, and then it's, happy ever after afterwards. But I don't think it'd be happy for anybody. I think that it'd be just a horrible place to live. Especially, we're used to things the way they are, the technologies. People rely on refrigerators for their food and so on and so forth. And, a good majority of the people wouldn't know what to do if they lost all that in the blink of an eye.
Right, so conditions on the surface would be chaotic.
Exactly.
So I think it's more important to focus on, and I think this is the thrust of Laura's public statements about this, be wary of the potential of what might be hitting us from space, but focus more on Gaia. I think the sustainability of the Earth trumps any vigilance that we need to maintain vis-a-vis space. Obviously, we want to track objects that might strike us, and we want to have a multidimensional space program. What we object to, to counter potential physical threats to our security, and even biological ones in terms of monitoring visitors who are coming here. But what we object to is doing so under a regime of secrecy. Secrecy is inevitably corrupting, and that's what we've gotten. Instead of having an open society where we publicly debate what we should do in some of these major areas of the survival of the human genome, the U.S. government has perpetrated 60 years of secrecy. And certainly if I reach the presidency, I'm going to do my best to try to reverse that. We need somebody in the White House who will advance forward under the banner of truth and not just make claims of supporting change and then remain an intelligence community apparatchik. And that's what we have in our current president. And to the extent that the presidency has essentially been captured by the CIA, I dare say that's also what we'll have if we elect Newt Gingrich president. These individuals were approached decades ago, informed of their presidencies, and have been managed as intelligence assets since then. And my awareness of that, as somebody who was involved in these secret programs and who was informed of his own presidency by my father and also by Mr. Hunt of the CIA, not officially but unofficially on a back-channel basis, that also, I think, is causing great alarms inside the intelligence community, because really the quantum cover-up involving the U.S. presidency is also starting to crumble. So my major prediction, you asked about a prediction about the future, what I see is regime change in the United States, where leadership by professional politicians and intelligence community operatives ends, and where we have authentic leadership from people who rise up organically from the people.
I hope you're right, Andrew. I really hope you're right, because that's what we need. Andy, we've got about another 12 minutes to go here, and if anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to speak about, by all means, now's the time.
Well, I just want to thank Governor Jesse Ventura for the invitation he extended to me back in October, where we went out to film an episode of Conspiracy Theory out in my old time travel haunts in New Mexico. Jesse Ventura is the kind of leader that I think is going to emerge during this crisis era that we're now going to be entering. He's an utterly authentic, truthful individual who has a heart of gold. And so I think it's individuals like Jesse that we might rally around. I mean, imagine what a privilege it was for me as somebody who had been investigating his childhood time travel experiences for 10 years to be literally standing on the grounds of the state capitol complex in Santa Fe and explaining to somebody who had served as the governor of a state and somebody who has been spoken of as a potential president, listening intently about my account of having teleported there and understanding that I was telling the truth. I just wanted to state that I think that ultimately is going to be determinative of our destiny as a country. Are we going to rally around people of integrity like Governor Ventura, or are we going to continue to allow ourselves to be misled by opportunists? That's the choice. And it was really clear to me that the universe was beginning to work in the direction that I've been trying to move it for 10 years. Because Jesse invested the resources of his own, program in going out there and going to some of the locations that I was at as a child and really bringing the story forward. And I guess broadly that means that we really have to ask ourselves, does this person who's trying to persuade me of what their truth is, does this person have integrity? And I learned a lot about Jesse Ventura during that day we were filming together, to state that he's a person really of high integrity. And hopefully individuals like that, because we are a great country, will emerge organically from the people and will right the ship of state again, like we have during previous crisis eras. But that's what I'm predicting is essentially a crisis era in which the people's belief that the United States government has its own well-being in mind is completely invalidated, so that there's a major sea change in government where a group of private citizens finally is voted into office. I think we're going to see that not this election, but in 2016, and I hope to be part of that.
Well, I hope so too, and I agree with you with Jesse Ventura. You know, I know there's been some out there who question him, but those same people question everybody. And if you're not going to put your faith in somebody, in something, then you've absolutely got no hope. And I think Jesse Ventura is a stand-up patriot. I support him 100%. I'm also a big supporter of Ron Paul. I just want the truth to get out. I want people to know what's really going on. And like you said, all this secrecy, enough is enough. I know I've had enough. We're getting raped and pillaged here, and it's time to make a change. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, in his program Conspiracy Theory, Governor Ventura has really taken the American people down that rabbit hole, and they've seen how bizarre the secret activities have been done with our tax dollars. You know, the building of trillions of dollars of deep underground military bases, the concealment of time travel, the concealment of Mars visitation, and constantly the drumbeat of lying from the public and institutions that should be serving us, the government, the media, academia. This is really the crisis of confidence that we confront, is that the mainstream institutions betrayed the truth, and the American people know it. And I think that we still have enough vitality and integrity as a country to reverse that, and I think it's not going to be a picnic when it starts. It's going to be fairly challenging for those people who are in the fight, but it's going to occur.
I agree, Andrew, 100%. Now, one last question. Have you tried to present this to anybody in the White House? I know that's kind of a laughing matter at this point. They like to sweep stuff under the rug, but have you tried to approach them about this, and if so, what's been the response?
Well, I did respond to an invitation from President and Mrs. Obama that was posted on Facebook about meeting them. I haven't sent an official letter. I think I'm going to send an official letter, but you know something, Michael? Look, Brett and I know that Barry Soetoro was one of our M.A.R.S. classmates. We have both independently stated and corroborated each other about the fact that he was also present on the surface of Mars with us. If at the time of our public disclosure of that, he's appearing publicly to deny the notion that the U.S. government even has any knowledge of extraterrestrial life, when he sat in a 3-week seminar taught by Major Ed Dames exploring the different species on Mars, including those that were predators that would be inimical to his life when he visited Mars, and then spending several months with Regina and I working on our responses to that hypothesis of whether or not the Martian humanoid civilization was a threat to the humanoid civilization on Earth or not. If he then literally holds a press conference where he denies the existence of extraterrestrials and has a speechwriter write a canned response that was an absolute departure from reality, what's the point of even contacting him? I don't want to meet with him if he's going to dishonor the presidency by being a liar. I would rather replace him.
No, I hear you. You know, that's what I say. There's people who say, well, I sent a letter to Obama and so on and so forth, and that's the point I try to make. You can send your letters. It's deeper than that. And, you know, they're not going to bring things out in the open just because, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 people or 100,000 people want them to. They have an agenda, and that's what we need to beat.
See, what's happening actually culturally and historically is, as a result of the emergence of the Internet, it's difficult at this point to conceal information. I think we would all agree that we want to live in a civilization where privacy is protected. But regarding public secrets, we're not living in a hierarchical society or noosphere, as Talhar Deschardin called it. In other words, Our informational environment is omnidirectional at this point because of the way that everybody can potentially be linked on the Internet. And the way that our public and institutions are operating, basically government, the political side of government, the military and intelligence sides of government, the media, academia, science, and so forth, the science press, is still back in that hierarchical mode where they're acting as if they can dispense the truth to others rather than share it in an omnidirectional way. And that hasn't existed for over 10 years. So what's happened is our public institutions, which need to evolve and embrace this new omnidirectional reality, are becoming reactive to us, to our civil liberties, to our right to be told the truth, to new information, to the truth that's coming out about previously secret information. And they're desperate at this point to maintain a set of cover-ups that are already crumbling. Nothing is going to change in that regard because shutting down the Internet would result in a bloody revolution that the American people would wage against the government. I dare say that if the government made a move on the Internet, we would probably see armed insurrection against hard military targets and governmental buildings within the U.S. So I don't think that's on the table. I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think that the political intel and military leadership of our country is stupid enough to do something as provocative as shutting down the Internet. That means that this omnidirectional regime of informational sharing among individuals and groups is only going to increase. And I saw that in terms of the alacrity, the speed with which I became a public figure after I began sharing vital information with the public. So that's only going to increase. There are going to be more individuals like myself, more individuals like Julian Assange, and we're basically in a revolution of information at this point. And the government will not turn the tide of that. They're going to have to evolve, and that's why I think that we need to recognize, as Mario Cuomo of New York observed, actually citing Abraham Lincoln, that government exists to do the things that people can't do individually. That's not going to go away just because of the advent of the Internet. But government, nonetheless, has to evolve so that it's not blocking the development of this omnidirectional society, but synthesizing with it. That's what's critical.
That's right. Andrew, I thank you so much for joining us again here on Late Night in the Midlands. It's always a pleasure to have you. I envy the work that you do and to come out and talk about it freely, despite some who ridicule and try to discredit. I do appreciate it. And if you would, any websites that you could direct the listeners to, by all means, go right ahead. And I just want to let you know you're linked up over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com, and we'll keep it that way.
Well, I have two websites. I'm soon going to be upgrading them into a different platform. But I'm at my time travel information is at projectpegasus.net, and my Mars information is at projectmars.net. And I yet don't have the information regarding the visitation. Primarily, projectmars.net remains the online publication, if you will, for the Mars Anomaly Research Society, where it focuses on the data in NASA's images, which show that Mars is an inhabited planet. But as I upgrade both of my sites, I'm going to be synthesizing the information, both the interviews and articles and so forth, about the hidden history of U.S. visitation and colonization of Mars.
All right.